I look over this building this morning, Brother Wardway, I don't see many peacocks here. I see some who think you're pretty, but you're not. I see some of you girls that look at yourself so much when you walk down the street, you bump into street lamps and telephone poles trying to do this. Why you do it? Only God knows why you do it. Must help a little bit, and God knows need all the help you can get in many cases. And no, most of us are ravens. I'm a raven. God uses ravens. I hear Dr. R.G. Lee preach, and I say, well, I'd like to preach like that, but I'm not that. I'm just a raven. I'm just a hellfire and brimstone preacher. But thank God He uses ravens. I was thinking back last night when I was a young man in Hillcrest Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. So many young preacher boys in our church. And so many of them were expected to go all the way to the top. And nobody expected me to go to the top. And I'm not sure I'm to the top, but nobody expected me to ever do anything. I was thinking over the list. There was Joe Boyd, All-American football player. He was a peacock. Oh, boy. 6'3" tall, 235 pounds. Had built like this. And I was built like this, like a milk bottle. And I used to look at Joe Boyd, and I'd say, what a man. And boy, the people thought Joe has become a good, successful preacher. But nobody ever thought the little Raven Hyles would mount anything. I was thinking last night there was Dan Davis. Dan was third baseman on the baseball team, and a wonderful third baseman, and a wonderful young man. He was a clean-cut young man. Everybody had high dreams for Dan Davis, a great guy. And Dan is a fine pastor today, a successful pastor. But he was a dove or a robin redbreast, but nobody thought little Raven Hyles would ever do anything much. I thought last night about Alvin Stone. Alvin Stone was a wonderful young man, talented, gifted. They had him back to preach in our church when I was a young man. I thought, boy, I'd love to preach like Alvin Stone can preach. And everybody expected Alvin Stone to do something. He was a robin redbreast. Nobody expected Raven Hyles to do anything. I thought last night about Red Shaw. Red Shaw was a manager of a Safeway store. And Red got saved. I'll tell you, when he got saved, he was like the dog named Rover. When he died all over. Red Shaw got saved. He got saved all over. I want you to know he witnessed to everybody he could. You never saw anybody like Red Shaw in your life. He was a prize fighter. And I used to watch him fighting the Golden Gloves. And boy, big old his nose was spread and spread and spread, looking all across his face. And old Red Shaw, what a man, what a preacher, what a Christian! And Red Shaw came down and got saved, and the whole town, the whole neighborhood was rejoiced. And Red Shaw gave his life to preach the gospel. And everybody said, boy, that's wonderful. Won't Red be an amazing preacher? And he is a fine preacher. He still pastors a church to this day. But nobody thought little Raven Hyles would ever do anything. I thought last night about Mel Rudder, one of the most brilliant men I ever met. Mel Rudder, when he was in college, he took 40 courses, made A's in 39 and a B in 1, and he couldn't sleep for days because he made a B. He was voted the preacher most likely to succeed in our college. He was also from our church. And everybody thought, Mel Rudder, what a fine man. Oh, how he loved the Lord. How I loved to hear that man pray. How he could say, Jesus, I love you, Jesus. And how he could say it. And everybody knew that Mel Rudder would someday be a fine preacher. And he is a fine preacher to this day. But nobody thought little Raven Hyles would ever do anything. I thought last night about Jack Atkinson, a fine young man, married one of the fine young ladies in our church. I thought about Jack Atkinson. And God called Jack to preach, and everybody knew Jack could make it. He had a dynamic personality and a strong body, and was an athletic type. And everybody thought Jack Atkinson would make it. But nobody thought little Raven Hyles would do anything. I thought about Bob Keys. You know Bob Keys. Bob is a fine preacher. All these fellows preachers this day. And Bob's a fine preacher. He's preached behind this pulpit. And everybody, when Bob Keys grew up, he was a feisty little fellow, went with all the girls. I never would go with a girl. I wouldn't ask any girl for a date. I'd try to get enough courage to ask a girl for a date. And I'd say, hey, would you like to, she'd say, like to what? And I'd say, move over, I want to walk by, please. I couldn't get enough courage to ask a girl for a date. I recall the first date I had to have one because it was a special meeting. And my girlfriend sent word and by her friends and said, ask Jack if he's going to get me a corsage. I didn't know what a corsage was. Never heard the word corsage in my life. And I was up in my teen years. I didn't know what a corsage was. And I didn't want to act dumb. So I said, just tell her she can order anything on the menu. I don't care what she eats. I thought a corsage bound to be something to eat. And I didn't buy her a corsage. And the first date I ever had, they wore long dresses. Now, in those days, they didn't wear long dresses all the time. Long dresses were formals. You wore them to formal affairs. And after the formal banquet was over, I didn't know where to go. And so I went and took Dickie Green and I took her girlfriends, played miniature golf. And there they were in their formals and corsages, holding the dress up. I mean, folks, I just a raven. That's all. I'm sorry. I wasn't any peacock. I didn't have any pretty feathers, and I wasn't any dove. Nobody suspected me of ever being anything, and I wasn't any robin redbreast. I was just a raven. But aren't you glad God can use ravens? God uses ravens like little poor Gideon. God uses ravens like the wicked Billy Sunday. God uses ravens like you and me. Doesn't matter who you are or what you've been, God can use you. Yes, He can. You say, Brother Hyles, I've been such a sinner. God can use you if you'll get right. Give all you have to God. He can use you. Oh, but you don't know my past. I know, but God can use you. God said, I think when the Lord said, I want to feed Elijah, I think He said, I want to choose the ravens. Why? I want my people to know. Doesn't matter how untalented, I can use them. Doesn't matter how ugly, I can use them. If you don't believe God can use ugly people, look here. Look here. Did you ever see a motley-looking crowd in your life? And yet God uses them. Every time I look at Brother Hilton, I just am amazed that God can save a wretch like him. But you say, Brother Hyles, I'm not very pretty. Yeah, I know God uses ugly people. He uses ravens. But you say, I don't have any money. I know, but God uses ravens. But you say, I'm not very smart. Yeah, I know, but God uses ravens. But you say, preacher, I didn't make good grades in school. I know, but God uses ravens. But you say, I can't even make a speech. I know, but God uses ravens. God uses ravens, and God will use you. But now I want to come down to the thrust of the message this morning. Not only does God feed the raven, and God uses the raven, but here's what I want. God helps us with ravens. God helps us with ravens. Did you know sometimes the sweetest morsel comes in the most wicked bill? You know sometimes the messenger might not be much, but God will use the message. I'm talking to somebody this morning who's had some tough events lately. Somebody's cussed you out. You ought to read my mail. I was looking at Mrs. McKinney, I was looking through the files in your office. My files are in her office. And she keeps my letters, of course, my secretary. And I had to go in there Friday night. I was trying to check somebody, and I came across the crank file. We have a crank file. That's where I put your letter. And anybody writes me. And I came across some of the funniest things. One fellow wrote me and he said, you know what you remind me of? You remind me of Balaam's donkey. And I wrote back, I read my letter. I wrote back and I said, I'm Balaam's donkey. But in this case, the donkey had more sense than the fellow who was riding him. And in my own timid way, I got back at him. But I began to read those letters. But did you know, I got thinking, I wonder how many of those letters have made a better man out of me. I wonder how many times a raven, or in our language, some old buzzard, has written me a dirty, nasty letter and told me off. And my first thought was, I'll get him! And then maybe I read it again. And maybe I thought, you know, he may be right. I'm not what I ought to be. Maybe I better check that a little bit. I wonder how many times God has used ravens, the dirty bird, the unclean bird, to bring a message. When I was reading the Bible, I read about Shimei. Don't you recall when David was leaving Jerusalem and his son Absalom was king on the throne, or was trying to become the king, and his forces were fighting against David's forces? David, rather than fight against his own son, fled. And as he was fleeing, a little fellow came up named Shimei, and he took dust, and he threw dust in David's face. And he got a rock, and he threw a rock in David's face, and called him, "Ah, you dead dog! Ah, you dead dog! Ah, you filthy David! You're the one that caused Abner to be killed." And David's servant, Abishai, reached for the sword, and he pulled his sword and yanked it out and said, "Your Honor, let me chop his head off! That dirty dog! Let me chop his head off!" And David said, "No, leave him alone. Leave him alone." He said that he may be a messenger sent to buffet me. Yeah, he was a buzzard. Yeah, he was a raven, but God so often uses ravens. Did you know God uses sometimes the most awful experience to make you have the blessed things of life? As I look back over my life, and by the way, I still have some to look forward to, I think. But as I look back over my life, I look back over the times when the ravens came, the buzzards came. I was thinking last night about that experience down in East Texas. A deacon, 72 years of age. That rascal, he was 72 then, and that's been 25 years ago, and he's still alive. I prayed for God to kill him 25 years ago. That shows how much power I have in prayer. But, that deacon, he was a rascal. His own married son tried to kill his wife. And one night late they called me and said, "Come quickly." His wife called me and said, "Come quickly." And I went down to the house, and the fellow had a gun pointing it to his wife's head and pulled the trigger, but there were no bullets, or blank. And